Hello, my name is Menno van Dam. I'm a Dutch salmon and steelhead fisherman who divides his time between chasing big Atlantic salmon and Baltic salmon in Europe in the spring and the early summer, and steelhead in British Columbia in the fall. Right now you find me here on the banks of the river Morrum in the south of Sweden, a famous fishery for big Baltic salmon and sea trout in the fall. Right now it's May and we are looking for big salmon in the river, which are about to run. In the meantime, I would like to talk you through some equipment we use on this river. On this river we use two-handed rods, two-handed fly rods for our salmon and sea trout fishing. And it depends on the time of the year what rod, reel and line combination we use. In the springtime and in May, right now, we use 15-foot rods or 14-foot rods for 10-weight lines. Talking about lines, this is a typical Swedish river where they use shooting heads being cast with an underhand cast. The shooting heads you find in different sinking rates and different weights. The weight of the line is measured in grams and will vary between 28 and 42 grams depending the time of the year you want to fish. In the early season, that's April, for the kelp fisheries, we would like to fish with rods which can cast a line from about 36 to 40 grams. And that time of the year we use sinking lines because the water is very cold and the fish are deep down in the pools. The sinking line I'm showing you here is a shooting head which has a sinking point in this occasion from S3 followed by a piece of S2. You have them in more different types like S3, S4 or S4, S5, and the higher the number, the faster the fly line will sink. What kind of line you use depends on water flow and water temperature conditions. The line is being cast with the rod, a two-handed rod, 15 foot like this one, long upper grip, short bottom grip to be held with two hands. Later in the season, like it is now in the second week of May, we like to fish, even if we have high water, with a fly line which is a little higher in the water column. We use fly lines like S1, S2 or intermediate with a poly leader tips on it, or even a light sink tip line like you see here. When the water gets warmer, and warmer means above 12 degrees Celsius or around 12 degrees Celsius, we would like to fish with intermediate lines or floating lines with an intermediate sink tip, like you see here. Later in the month of May, we would like to go to floating lines with an intermediate tip or complete floating lines with long leaders. The shooting head is the part of the fly line where you make the cast with and where you fish with. Behind that, connected to the reel, and you can see it here, is the yellow piece on the reel, is a running line or shooting line. We have two types in there mainly. One is the flat beam, which is a nylon line, which is very smooth and very slick, but it's a little difficult to control in between your fingers. Or we have a floating level shooting line like this one. This is about 30 pounds breaking strength shooting head. We go to the front part of the fly line. On the front part we usually make a small loop where we can add a poly leader on. You see the loop here on the fly line. and you see the loop here on the poly leader, and we can easily loop them together and connect them. In front of the poly leader, we use some leader material where we can then tie the fly on. Basically, we have two types of leader material. The traditional nylons, which again will have a breaking strength, a minimum between something like 15 or like this, 12.5 kilo for these big May salmon. For sea trout later in the season, you can go with a bit lighter tippet material. Like I said, this is the classic material, soft nylon, good breaking strength. Look for a nylon, to my opinion, which is clear and soft enough to make good knots and which is resistant against teeth of salmon and against going over rocks. The last couple of years, some new type of nylon has come on the market that is fluorocarbon. And some people really like to fish with that. It's a little stiffer than the traditional nylon, but it has more resistance against teeth of fish and against going over rocks and other sharp bottom material. Of course, on the end of the leader, we will put a fly. This is my little fly box. Ulf Seal, the local famous fly tyer here from Morrum, will tell you all about flies there is to know about flies, so I won't go into that any deeper. Later in the season, we go to a little shorter rods. Like I said, in May we like to use the 10 and the 15-foot rods. In September for the sea trout, August, September, we go to a 12 to 13-foot rod. A little later, number 8, number 9 rods with a little lighter shooting heads, 27, 30 grams heads. The rods, like you see, will also have a little shorter grips, a little more compact casting tool. Because sea trout fishing, as you will see on the DVD, is a very stealthy game. It's mostly done on the trees and in tight areas. You can use a shorter two-hander or if you want a single-handed rod. But we prefer on this river the two-handed salmon rod. When we go out fishing on the river, we need to dress for the fishing. These days we like to use these modern Gore-Tex waders. They're very light to wear and they're breathable, so you don't sweat in them as much as we used to do in the old plastic waders. They don't give any isolation against the cold water temperature. So below it, we like to use this fleece material, these big trousers, below these Gore-Tex waders. To not slip in the river, we use some sturdy wading boots. And these boots have filled soles. And they will grip on the rock. If you have a river like the Morrum with a lot of plants growing on the rock and a lot of algae, you might want to use some studs, some aluminium studs under your waders. You really have to watch out walking on rocks with them, because on dry rocks they're very slippery. Early in the season, when the water is very cold, we still use some neoprene waders. These are 5 mil waders, and they'll give you extra protection against the cold river. To carry all this equipment to the river, the flies, the leaders, the fly lines, some people like to use a fly fishing vest for it. With all these nice little pockets, you can put your stuff, your treacherous flies, in the pocket and take them with you on the river. I personally prefer to wear a wading jacket, because then I don't have this bulky vest around me and gives me a little bit more freedom of movement when I'm casting. The modern wading jackets are also made of Gore-Tex, so they're waterproof and they stop the wind, and they have these nice big chest pockets where you can put your fly box and your leader material in. I like to go with a minimum amount of equipment on the river. One good box of flies, some sets of leader material, the poly leaders, and a little clipper for my nylon, and not to forget a sharpening stone to sharpen my hooks on. And that's basically all I take with me to the river. What you don't see here is a wading staff. I don't like to walk around with these staffs, especially not when I'm wading. They get tangled between my legs. I like to have a good pair of wading boots which give me enough support in the river.